Back a few weeks ago in a collection update video, I mentioned I'd purchased this neat little upscaler known as the XRGB-mini Framemeister for my TV setup, and since then I've taken any chance I could get to share images showing off the quality this thing brings to the table, so let me just get it all out of my system, okay? I've been burning to talk about this thing in depth for a month now, so I'm making this video. First, I want to give you a brief history of how I've traditionally captured gameplay in the past, introduce the Framemeister and discuss what it can do, to ultimately show you the improvement with side-by-side comparison, and explain the further additions to the setup coming sometime down the line. For the sake of authenticity, all of the gameplay capture you'll be seeing in this video is raw without any cleanup, unless otherwise stated. So let's get stuck in. When I was a kid, I didn't understand how people captured gameplay at all. I was one of those kids who pointed the camera at my TV back in the day, up until 2011 when I discovered capture cards and what they were all about. Since all I knew was composite and component at the time, I purchased this EasyCap dongle the same day Modern Warfare 3 was released here in Australia. I got home from school, set up my capture card, and lost by a mile in a 1v1 to my friend who, by the way, skipped school to play the game. That's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. I still have this gameplay, by the way. I'm somewhat of a digital hoarder when it comes to gameplay. I've got archives of the stuff since late 2011, but we'll get into that more a bit later. Not long after this, I made the channel you're on right now to start fresh and begun uploading videos. This original setup was composite into the device, capturing through the PC software that came with it. This meant I had to sit at the computer to record stuff, which really wasn't ideal, as I liked sitting by the TV. So over HDMI, I mirrored my PC screen on the TV, a setup I still use to this day with my TV as a second screen for the computer. Playing games like this meant I still had to get up to the PC to start and stop recording, but it was an improvement. What wasn't an improvement was the input lag this introduced. It was nothing too bad and I did adjust to it, but it was rough. But then this device started to fail me. For starters, despite promising HD game capture, the best it could do was a 4x3 480p image. Even if it was set to record at 16:9, it would do so in a 4x3 aspect ratio. But at some point, everything I recorded would be out of sync. The audio and video would slowly get further and further apart from when it started. This is some old footage from when I first tried to test this and see if I could figure out the problem. Notice how the bouncers are out of sync, and eventually, the FMV is too.
Leave a door open, and a child could walk right into this factory, right into the monster world.
I won't go in a kid's room! You can't make me!
All of this started once I hit the mailbox. It's so strange. So, in May of 2014, I purchased the Avermedia Live Gamer Portable. I gotta tell you, while everyone was bitching about how awful Watch Dogs looked compared to its announcement trailer, I was here blown away, seeing the Xbox 360 over HDMI on my own setup for the first time. For my 360, the problem was solved. I had HD video, but for the older stuff, I still had to use a variation on my old method. Sending the signal through the EasyCap to the software on my PC, I was able to make it full screen, and then capture the PC screen via HDMI through the LGP. The reason I purchased this particular device over an Elgato was because of the hot button. I can just press this to start and stop recording, meaning I can play at the TV without having to continuously go over to the computer. So while it was a back-ass method, it was still an improvement. The biggest issue with capping this way was that my PC screen is 16:9, so the full screen gameplay was automatically stretched to 16:9. With no control over it, I settled for the stretched gameplay because it didn't make any sense to me if I would have re-stretched it back down to its original size. It was already a blurry mess and that would have only deteriorated the quality more. At the same time, I'd split the signal so that I had direct input into my TV for playing on. Only at this point in time did I realise how bad the input lag was with my old setup of using the TV as a secondary PC screen. Along with this, I was always too lazy to crop my gameplay in videos to remove the overscan that you normally wouldn't see on your TV. This was until August of 2016, when I discovered by complete accident after all this time that the EasyCap software had a zoom function. So, starting with my Legend of Spyro reviews, all gameplay from then on was zoomed in, saving me the effort of having to crop it in post-production. This is how I recorded gameplay up until July of 2017. EasyCap to the PC through the LGP. But when my PC died last year and I had to get a new one, I found out the hard way that Windows 10 has some kind of built-in copyright protection on devices such as this one. I can still use the EasyCap software how it was originally intended, meaning out of sync audio and 4x3, but when trying to capture the PC screen with the LGP or in OBS, the image was simply blank, like a black hole. Literally, to the point where if I took a screenshot of this, the hole was transparent. What the fuck? This blew my mind. I'd never heard of such a thing happening, and now my entire setup for retro consoles, my main bread and butter, was ruined. Luckily enough, however, using the EasyCap as a source, bypassing its own software entirely, allowed me to capture gameplay through OBS. I decided for consistency's sake to keep the gameplay at 16:9, meaning I was now stretching the capture myself just so that people hopefully wouldn't notice any dramatic change. This was again still an improvement in my eyes, as OBS allowed me to capture gameplay at 50 FPS for the first time. Now I know PAL and NTSC frame rates don't mean as much these days, especially in the realm of online video, but I still prefer sticking with the standard in my region. Listen, 50 is better than 25, so you'll just have to excuse me on that one. Anyway, OBS was a lifesaver, but a killer at the same time. I could still cap gameplay, but now I was stuck moping over to the PC again every so often to start and stop my recording, which the button for that is right next to the start streaming button. So I had mass anxiety, being very careful every time, double and triple checking it during cutscenes and all that, as to not spoil what I was working on with an accidental stream. This totally killed my motivation to play games as a hobby, and despite the minor improvements, upgrades and downgrades to the system, I was still forced through this old dongle. This has been my ball and chain for years now, an overpriced, inadequate product designed specifically for a sucker like my 15-year-old self. I've wanted nothing more than to bypass the entire PC part of the process and send the footage directly into my LGP via HDMI for so long now. This device does come with a component adapter, but mine never worked. So, I've spent the last few years trying to find some kind of solution. Cheap upscale devices, RCA to HDMI, RCA to component. I even purchased an Elgato Game Capture HD at one point, but for whatever reason, it put out even worse quality than what I was working with, so I returned it immediately and got a full refund, thank God. All the cheap devices I tried failed miserably, and I was lucky if they even displayed anything. That was until I discovered the Framemeister, a device from Japan designed specifically for retro gaming. Through the YouTube channel My Life in Gaming, who've been my main source of inspiration here, they make great shit, go and check them out, I learned the wonders of RGB video quality over SCART, a format more common in Europe over the years, and one that the Framemeister is specifically designed to upscale for modern displays. But this thing was expensive, so because I'm a cheap bastard, I then wasted more time trying and testing out cheap SCART upscaling devices to no success. Just look how bad these things were, and that's if they even displayed correctly through the game capture card or my TV. I did this for months until I finally gave in, killed my savings account and just bought the fucking thing. I do allow myself one major tech purchase each year, a new mic and camera in 2015, a better mic and camera in 2016, a new PC last year, and now finally an amazing upscaler in 2018. So let's see what it can do. Now I'll say right off the bat, if you want all the technical details, further information and much better produced content than mine, do check out My Life in Gaming's RGB Masterclass series on YouTube. There'll be a card on screen and link in the description. I'm simply going to give you a brief rundown in relation to my own setup. The device does a great job at upscaling the traditional 240p resolutions of old systems into 720 and 1080p resolutions for modern displays. My TV is actually a Panasonic from 2006, so unfortunately it can only support up to 720p, meaning all the Framemeister footage you'll be seeing from me is recorded at 720p, 50 frames per second. The plus side of the older TV is that it doesn't have any of the bullshit features newer units have that contribute to input lag. But you shouldn't expect to just plug in composite video and get anything greater than composite video. In some cases, I actually find it less appealing than what I had previously. So what I'm using instead is RGB over SCART into a Euro-SCART adapter into the Framemeister. Surprisingly, most consoles released after the NES are already built with RGB output. You just need the correct cables to access it. As you can see, it looks absolutely brilliant. I'm still in shock at the fact that all the years I've had my PS1 that it was built for this level of quality. I also lucked out on my Super Nintendo. With no previous knowledge, my SNES is clearly a one-chip unit, a hardware revision with a superior RGB signal than earlier models. Sega's consoles are known for some of the worst composite quality out there, but actually have the best RGB output in comparison to the competition. The Mega Drive, what I've previously claimed to be my second most neglected system, is now top of the list for some action in the future. And finally, PAL Region GameCubes natively support this RGB signal, meaning that I don't need to spend $300 on component cables, do any modification, or settle for S-Video. The GameCube being my most neglected system, primarily due to the price of games and small number that I own, makes me really want to get into this system now, seeing how it looks. The Framemeister is said to do less of an amazing job with 480 content, but it's still a major improvement to what I've had previously. My PS2 and Wii are connected via component, and I think it looks awesome. PS1 games on the PS2 look just as good as on their original hardware over SCART, which is ideal for my current setup and the lack of space. As for the Nintendo 64, unfortunately, the highest output it natively supports is S-Video, a signal my old EasyCap always accepted, but I didn't know enough about to bother with. It is still an improvement though. As for the NES, which only outputs RF and composite, and the Atari 2600, which only outputs RF, they're both being captured through composite. The Atari goes through a VCR first, where the RF signal is converted to composite. Like I said, the Framemeister does what it can, but it's not ideal. In the future, I am planning to get my NES modded for this RGB output, so that I can finally ditch the old composite cables. There are RGB mods for the Nintendo 64 as well, however, I'm not the biggest fan of how it looks due to all the quirks the N64 brings to the table. I could potentially mod the 2600 for higher quality output, but I don't think that suits the Atari style. You expect to see lower quality graphics as it's part of the charm, but I do need a new RF cable for it as mine is old and only displays if the cable is bent in a specific way. That sounds safe, right? And finally, my HD systems don't even touch the Framemeister. They just go directly into the Live Gamer Portable through an HDMI switcher, though the Framemeister does have two HDMI inputs if I need them. Some people might be wondering why I use component cables with the Wii instead of the Wii to HDMI. I have one, I've been using it for the past year just for simplicity's sake, but in comparison to the quality I can get with component through the Framemeister, it's inferior. Previously I had the Wii set up for widescreen mode, which the LGP shrunk into 4:3, which I could then re-stretch back out to 16:9 in my video editor. But now that's not necessary, as I can simply record the Wii in widescreen at 16:9 without any of those extra quirks. And that brings me to the Framemeister itself. What can it do in comparison to some of the other top level upscaling options out there, such as the open source scan converter? The biggest selling point for this unit for me was simply the amount of functionality it brings to the table. While the default settings are very good, built in are a lot of options for tweaking the incoming source for an even higher quality capture. Settings for saturation and contrast levels, black levels, sharpness, and the main one for me being the zoom function, to remove that annoying overscan and get the image centered just right into the correct aspect ratio. Being able to tweak settings like this before I capture a full 8-hour playthrough of a game is obviously going to save me a lot of time in post-production, not having to mess about fixing issues that could have been avoided. Now every system is different of course, and some games have weird quirks. I've never noticed before, but the main menu in Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro on PS1 is not actually centered on the screen correctly compared to the rest of the game. For each system, I've carefully tweaked all the settings following various guides online from people who have a lot more free time than myself, and then saved individual profiles onto a mini SD card to load up when I need them. If something is still incorrect, I can simply tweak some settings before I begin and then revert to the original settings when I need to. So at most, if I want to play something, I turn the system on, turn on the Framemeister, load up the correct profile, do a quick check to make sure things are centered and at the correct aspect ratio. I'll spend a few minutes tweaking some settings if needed, something I'd probably do anyway, and then I can play. It's really no trouble at all. For the time being, I'm just swapping out cables, however I do plan on investing in some SCART and component switch boxes to save wear and tear on the connectors and for convenience sake. In some cases with systems such as the PS2, certain games have the option for a 16:9 resolution. While Grand Theft Auto games, for example, letterbox your screen, actually giving you a smaller field of view, other games use widescreen appropriately, so all I need to do is switch to 16:9 and I'm good to go. But this brings me to one major downside of the Framemeister I knew well about before I purchased it. Certain games across various console generations change resolution between menus and gameplay. Every time you check your inventory in Silent Hill, the game changes from 240p to 480i. The Framemeister does not handle this transition well at all, dropping out and having to resync every time. It's a major problem as these drops in my testing can cause video and audio to get out of sync during game capture, and make some titles unplayable like Silent Hill due to the frequent switching. Luckily most games don't do this, but my favourite fighting game, possibly of all time, Rival Schools United by Fate, does, meaning that the screen resyncs after the fight has already begun. That is just unacceptable. In these cases, since it's mostly the PS1 where I'm personally going to be affected by this, I will just play these particular games on the PS3. And now, after having said that, a lot of people are going to wonder, why not just play PS1 games on your PS3 to begin with, and save all this time and money on such a device? Well, the answer is simple. I prefer playing games as they're intended on their original hardware. I want to use my PS1 memory cards, various peripherals. For the sake of being authentic in reviews, I'll gladly play games with the original N64 controller despite hating its design, and at the end of the day, I like to use the games on my shelf. For handheld systems or stuff I'll never own, like some of the rare NES games out there, I'm fine using an emulator to record footage, but otherwise, I'm just not a fan of that method. I prefer original hardware, and in my opinion, the quality that the Framemeister is capable of rivals emulation, if only because of the extra functionality I have using original hardware. But, like I was saying, for the few cases like Silent Hill and Rival Schools, I have no problem using a PS3 in those situations. But everything else I've thrown at it has worked wonders, and the Framemeister works wonders with the game capture. Already, this device has helped me get back into gaming more so than I have been in a long time. I don't have a whole lot of spare time for playing games outside of a job scenario with YouTube, which is a different experience. Since I've had the Framemeister, I've been making the spare time to play games for myself. Hit and Run, Hitman 2, Spider-Man Enter Electro, and now Super Mario Galaxy, a game I've owned for a year and never touched, is finally being played, and funnily enough, it's the first Mario game I've actually not got bored of after the first hour of gameplay. Apparently, this device is said to introduce 1 to 3 frames of input lag. However, in the time I've spent with it, any lag went undetected by me. I even beat the Turbo Tunnel on Battletoads, had no issues in Contra, and can still kick ass with games ingrained into my muscle and timing memory. Overall, this is just a total game changer for me. Like I mentioned earlier, I hoard gameplay capture. Since around 2013, I've been playing through entire games, capturing my playthroughs and saving them across what's grown into 5 external hard drives, a 2TB, a 4TB, and 3 5TB hard drives. Out of those 21 terabytes, just over 2.5 are actually free right now. The rest is all playthroughs from the past 5 years. And half of that are playthroughs I'll need to recapture with the Framemeister. It works out to roughly 17.8 days worth of footage. Holy shit. The main reason I do this is so that if I ever need footage of a particular level or moment from a game, I already have it ready to go. I don't need to waste valuable time recapping it or blatantly downloading someone else's gameplay off of YouTube. I much prefer using my own gameplay in my videos so that you can see my authentic playthrough. Some channels out there actually use full long plays done by other people, which is just strange to me. When you watch someone reviewing a game, you'd expect to be seeing their personal experience on screen, but apparently you can't even expect that anymore because people are just too lazy, I suppose. But now that I've got a much better method of capturing gameplay, that basically means that all of the retro capture I have archived is completely worthless to me now. So over a long period of time, I'm hoping to go back through and recapture those playthroughs via the Framemeister like I said. If I need something easy, I'll make do until the task is completed by simply capturing what I need on a per video basis, but that's not going to be possible in some cases. If I need a mission late into a Grand Theft Auto game, for example, my only options are using the old archival footage or downloading someone else's, until I can find the time to play through the entire game. In some cases, I may use the old composite footage as it is archival footage after all. If I'm talking about an older video of my own or something I played years ago, having some of that gameplay makes sense because I didn't have the best equipment back then and you'd expect it to look old. But I am hoping to get back through these games as quickly as possible. Just recently, I streamed myself playing Mario Galaxy, and for the first time, I was able to record gameplay at the same time how I normally would. This method needs further testing though, as I did have some issues with a few of the clips. If I can get it working 100%, I'd be keen on live streaming casual playthroughs much more often, as a quick way of recapping a lot of these games and offering more live content, but only if I can figure out all the quirks associated with the process. The final thing I'd like to touch on is the future plans for this setup. Not long ago I reorganised my entire TV setup in preparation for this new edition, and already since my previous episode, things have changed even more. I've moved the PS4 out from the slot under my TV over to the side. I need to sit at the computer for streaming, so this makes it a lot easier to simply rotate the TV to an appropriate angle. But with all the reshuffling thanks to the Framemeister, I'm finally done with all of these composite cables. Just look at the guts of my old equipment. All of this is now irrelevant to my setup. Good riddance. Except for my CRT, which is still equipped for those classic red, white and yellow cables. The best this TV can handle is composite, and quite honestly, I think it does a much better job displaying it than even the Framemeister. The reason this TV is still set up is for light gun games that require this type of TV to even work correctly. At some point, I would like to split the signal off somewhere along the line, so that all systems can go into both the Framemeister LGP combo for capturing, and into the CRT via composite. I'd imagine the easiest way to do this would actually be one of those cheap HDMI to RCA converters, or at least a SCART to composite adapter so the system split off before the upscale. but I need to look into this more. On top of that, the GameCube, my most neglected system, is also getting an additional upgrade. The main reason I bought it in the first place was to play handheld games on my TV, but I've since learned the Game Boy Player software featured on Nintendo's official disc is actually inferior to what's available now through homebrew techniques. I'm currently waiting on an SD media launcher for the GameCube that will allow me to launch a homebrew software known as the Game Boy interface. This accurately displays Game Boy titles much better than the official software. Now again, to the people questioning me wanting to use only original hardware, but also using homebrew methods such as this, as well as the console modifications I mentioned earlier for my NES, these don't affect how the game plays. Well, actually, GBI plays handheld games in a more authentic fashion to the original hardware anyway, but despite clearer graphical quality, I'm still playing games on their original hardware with access to peripherals and using the games I own. Beyond that, the only additions I foresee coming down the line hopefully is a custom-built TV unit to house all of my systems and any new systems I pick up. Right now, I'm in the market for an original Xbox, but I'm also keen on adding a Master System, Saturn and Dreamcast to the mix. When these systems are eventually added, the Xbox will be connected to the Framemeister via component and the Sega systems via RGB SCART, until I can work out the Dreamcast's VGA output into the setup. So that's the rundown of how the Framemeister has totally changed my console setup. The fact that this high of quality is capable out of systems I've been playing on for decades is just insane, but I'm glad I can finally see my favourite games how they were intended. Like I mentioned at the top, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, head on over to My Life in Gaming's channel and check out their catalogue for more technical information. They've been my #1 resource for this entire saga, so I can't shout them out enough. It's been really awesome playing games just for fun as frequently as I have been for the first time in forever, and even though I've got a long way to go before everything is completely set up, and just thinking of all those games I need to recapture, every game I've tried out since I've jumped down this rabbit hole has blown my mind completely. It's like I'm finally seeing for the first time. It's great. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, found it interesting, or maybe even learned something from it. If you've got any further questions, be sure to leave a comment down below and I'll try to get you an answer. I'm Square-Eyed Jack and I hope you have a great fucking day. Thanks for watching.